All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Richard.lesperance. I go by the name of my man, Richard. Welcome to A Better Lifestyle. Today, I have the pleasure to have Scott Mcbrien with me. Welcome, Scott, to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much, Richard. Excited to be here.
Great. So we had a great little 5 minute talk before we started the podcast. So it's nice. I think you guys are gonna enjoy the podcast. So Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Scott Mcbrien, and we'll get started.
Yeah, Richard, I appreciate that. I came from a small town, lived in grew up in a very small town, about 500 people, no traffic lights. We had one grocery store, and which was a little mini mart, and that's where I worked like out of high school, right? Or while I was going to high school, and stocking shelves and all that. And but my dream was always to race professional motocross, to race, professional motocross. So I started racing, did that for 10 years. Did it as a pro for my last 2 years. A lot of broken bones, a lot of, all of that stuff, right? And kind of got that out of my system. And then started in the entrepreneurial world, really, getting my first business started, which was in that same small town. There was a little like butcher shop, grocery store, tiny little place. Then right next to it, there was a insurance agency that woman had just retired, and it was just four walls, inside there, and she had some desks in there. It wasn't, and then, but there's also like four apartments that went with that inside that building, and then there was the mini mart where I grew up, working. And one day I, was just driving to the grocery store, and I saw that it said for rent on the outside of that insurance space. And so I looked in the window, and here I am, in my 20s, right? And I look in the window and I'm like, what could I put in here? What would work inside this this small little town here? And I'm like, a pizza shop, because there was no pizza shops in our town. You had to drive into the big city, which was 12,000 people, right? It was like 6 or 7 miles away in order to get a pizza, and they wouldn't deliver into this small little town just because, it's like it wasn't economical for them to do so. So, being a young person and just, throwing all the risk to the wind or whatever, I said, okay, great. Called the lady, went over to her house, gave her $200 in cash, and said, I'm going to rent this place, and then I'm going to put a pizza and sub shop in there, having no clue about anything to do with what it takes to start a business, anything to do with, like, I didn't know, we had to build a kitchen. So that was kind of an experience too, right? So I went to two different banks on the same day, borrowed $5,000 because I had a full-time job, and, I could get a small personal loan. So now I had some working capital, and I went to a restaurant or a pizza shop in the larger town. And I went in there and I said, hey, listen, I'm doing a paper for school. I'd love to know, hey, how do you run one of these? What works? And so I was taking notes, and I'm like, oh, they have this thing that spins that makes dough. Okay, I don't know what that is. What's that? Oh, that's a dough mixer. I'm like, okay, I need one of those. Here's where I make sandwiches and a sandwich table. And so I got all the things that I needed in order to what other pizza shops used for their equipment. Started calling this used equipment places, got some equipment, and now I was like, okay, well, now I got to build a kitchen. I don't know how to build a kitchen, so I got my buddy who did some, he was in high school, or he had just got out of high school, I should say, and he had done some basic carpentry work. And I'm like, hey, you want to help me build a kitchen? And he's like, okay. So we started building a kitchen, having no idea about code or anything like that. And then we got to inspection, and we had several things in there that we had to fix. And I was starting to dwindle down the money because I was spending it in construction and spending it in all these things. And yeah, so we opened. And the first time we had made a pizza was 7 days prior to opening. I had never even made a pizza before in my life. So it was like I didn't know how to mix the dough. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. But again, I think there's a lot of really good lessons in there, right? Sometimes you just need to jump, and it's like, I love what Les Brown used to say, you jump and the net will appear. and sometimes you need to do that. And yeah, so we opened up and offered the first delivery service in that town. And just as that opened, they started doing construction on the bridge that crossed the river really close to us. So we had all those construction workers that would come over, to the pizza and sub shop, and it was just kind of like none of that was even on the radar prior to deciding to start this pizza and sub shop. So sometimes, like I said, you jump, and then it's almost like the world says, okay, well, they're not going to quit. They're not going to give up. So I guess we need to make it work for them. And I think there's a lot of really good lessons in there in doing that, right? So then we started that, got that up and going. And at the time, I was working full time. I was working in the pizza and sub shop, and I was racing motocross. And so I was literally 20. Oh, and I was going to college. So I literally worked for work from 11 to 7 at the nuclear power plant. That's where I worked in my town, 11 to 7. Then I would leave that and I would go to college and I would take business classes. I would come home from that. I would sleep for about 3 or 4 hours. And then I would go open up the pizza and sub shop, and I would work there until I had to leave for work again. And then on the weekend, I was racing motocross. So it was just nonstop. It was nonstop. And then one day in the pizza and sub shop, I collapsed. And I, just woke up and didn't know what was going on or whatever. And, went to the hospital, had blood pressure checked, all that. And the doctor said, he's like, or first the nurse came in, put the thing around your arm for the blood pressure, right? And she grabs it, does it again, and then she takes that off and gets another one, puts that one on, and then she brings in the doctor, and the doctor comes in, and I'm like, "What's going on here? What's happening?" And he said, I said, "Is my blood pressure high? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, no. If you were 95 years old, it's not." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah." He said, you're either going to have to change something in your life, or we're going to have to put you on blood pressure medication. I'm in my 20s, and blood pressure medication for the rest of your life. And I was like, he goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm working full time. I started a business. I'm racing motocross. I'm going to college full time." And he's like, "Okay, something's got to go." He goes, "You pick, but something's got to go." He said, "I'm going to see you back here in," I think it was like 60 days or 90 days or something. And we'll see what's going on then. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I decided I was going to sell the pizza and sub shop and just lease that out to someone else. So I had all these, people coming in, and I put it out there. And this guy came in who ended up buying a franchise. We ended up becoming a little bit of friends and got to know each other well. And he was going to buy my pizza hub shop, and said he ended up buying this franchise. And so got to understand what the franchise was and all of that. And I said, "Wow, that looks amazing." So to make a long story short, I ended up selling the business, leasing out all those apartments. And I was like, wow, this is way easier, just leasing out 5 places as opposed to trying to get up and run the business every day and all that. And so, and so I ended up selling that building. I ended up buying one of those franchises. So with the proceeds from the sale, I ended up buying a franchise and paid cash for the franchise. And it was a Professional Carpet Systems. We did carpet cleaning and dyeing and restoration, really anything to do with carpet. And I moved to Georgia, on an island off the coast of Georgia, to get this started. And I kind of got that up and going and running. And within 6 months, we had all the major accounts down there. And it was really just taking the same work ethic and applying it to a different business, just working my tail off and, doing things maybe that others weren't willing to do. One time, actually, this is kind of a funny story. So down in St. Simon's Island was the name of it. And off the coast of St. Simon's, or kind of attached to it, I should say, is Sea Island, Georgia, which is an incredibly wealthy. I mean, there's not a home out there that's not more than probably $2 million, right? Or more. And they have this 5-star hotel that's called the Cloister. And that hotel was where George Bush Sr. Okay. George Bush Sr. used to go for his honeymoon. That's where he went for his honeymoon. He would come back there every single year. And so I had the contract for that cloister to do their carpets. And they called me up and they said, "Hey, Scott, listen, we've got the president coming in. We were going to just recarpet everything, but we really think we can just get everything, cleaned because it's really, it's pretty new. But we need it done in 3 days. Like we need it, and it's huge. It's like this massive, massive ballroom. So can you do it?" And I had to make a decision on the spot. Do I take care and of this, and I still had all my clients during the day. So I was going to have to go for 3 days with no sleep. So I basically worked my clients during the day, and then I worked this because when the dining room's closed, that's when I had to go and do work on these carpets at night until like a few hours before they opened the dining room. And then I had to pull all my equipment out and be out of there before they opened for the dining room. So yeah, so I went to my other clients I was talking about them. They're like, "Scott, don't worry about it. Like you do those things and we'll worry about the carpet." I said, "Nope, I made a commitment. I'm doing it." So yeah, so I literally went for 3 days with not 10 minutes of sleep and but that's what you got to do if you want to make it, right? If you want to be successful out there, that's what you've got to take advantage of opportunities when they get in front of you and then execute on those. And then, yeah, from there, that's when I got into the markets, Richard. That's when, so I was working my franchise and down there. And I used to watch this movie. It's an old movie back in the mid 80s. And it was called Wall Street, and it was with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen, the original movie. I don't know if have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, yeah. So I would watch that over and over again, and I was like, "Oh, that looks amazing! Like I want to be Gordon Gekko someday." And I had the whole, greed is good speech, memorized. I still could actually memorize it today, but yeah, and I just started reading everything I could, reading every single book I could get my hands. I'd buy two of them at a time, and I'd read every single book. Again, this is before podcasting, right? And YouTube and, all of these channels with the internet that we had. The way we got information was reading it, and you'd read it cover to cover. There was no audio books. There was no, you couldn't listen to it. It was just reading books. And so I literally read hundreds of books and just try to fill my brain with as much information as I can, and decided to take my Series 7 exam to be a licensed stockbroker. And I share in my book here, it's called The Sigma Investor. And in that book, I talk about my experience, same thing. No one would give me a chance to actually be a stockbroker. In order to be a stockbroker, you had to be sponsored by a brokerage firm, because they are basically saying, "Look, we think this guy can pass the Series 7 exam, and so we'll sponsor them to take the exam. But it costs them money if you don't pass the exam and everything." So I had a list of 100 brokerage firms, right? And I had done some things right prior to that with starting a business and getting businesses going and selling them and being profitable. I thought, sure, of course, someone's going to sponsor me. I would feel like I'm somewhat of a safe bet. And all of them said, "Scott, with your educational background, we have MBAs in finance that don't pass this exam. You're not going to pass this exam. And we appreciate you, but we're not, we can't sponsor you." So I just wrote out a list, same thing, just like, okay, well, what's the thing I can control? Wrote 100 brokerage firms down across the country. I don't care where I lived. I'm like, I'm just going to get into this business. And wrote them down and started making calls. And I started calling. And it was the same thing. "Scott, hey, listen, we appreciate it, but you'll never pass the exam. I apologize. Hey, Scott, we appreciate it, but you know what? You never passed this exam. We can't sponsor you." And I was like, how do I get these guys' attention? And I was like at number 66 on my list. And the only reason I remember that is because the 67th call that I made was to this investment banking firm in Georgia. And I called them and I said, "Hey, listen," I said, "I've got to use something different here. I got to get their attention somehow, some way, whatever." So there's one little line in the movie Wall Street where Bud Fox is trying to get into Gordon Gekko. He's trying to get in to see him, but he won't see him because, who's this guy, right? And he asks the receptionist if she'll marry him. So I'm like, hey, I'll try it, right? So I called and I was like, hey, da da da, can I, I'd like to speak to the recruiter, da 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 da. And then I just said, hey, you're seriously thinking about marrying me, aren't you? And she's like, what? And I'm like, whatever. So I ended up getting through, or no. So then she puts me on his voicemail. And then about an hour and a half later, I get a call back. And I'm like, hello, this is Scott. And he's like, so I hear you proposed to my receptionist. And I'm like, is she good looking? And he just started laughing, he just started laughing. And so I told him my background, the whole thing, just expecting really that he was going to be like, look, you're not going to pay. And he said, look, Scott, excuse me. He's like, I'll be honest with you. He goes, this is a very, very, very difficult exam to pass. It's 6-hour timed exam. And at the time they used to not break it up. When I took it, it was 6 hours straight, and it's options, equations, and all of these, securities laws and everything else that you have to pass. And they purposely wait for the most difficult math equations to put towards the end when you're most burnout and you're just like, I just want to go home, And so he's like, he goes, I really don't. He said, but there's just something about you. I guess, I don't know what it is. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I cannot make you any promises. And I was staying in New York at the time, up where I grew up. And he said, but if you can be here, this was on a Thursday. He said, but if you can be here Monday morning at 7, I think it was at 7, at 7 a.m., he said, or 7:30. If you can be here Monday morning at 7:30, I'll take a look. We'll have a conversation, but zero promises. I'm like, okay, fine, no problem. So I calling around, trying to figure out, get airlines and, try to get flights and all this stuff. Show up there at like, I don't know, half hour prior to the meeting. I'm sitting there. I go into that same receptionist who I proposed to last Thursday. And I just said who I was, da 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 da. And I'm sitting there in the reception area, and he hadn't shown up yet. So he walks in, and she's like, your 7:30 is there? He's like, my 7:30? He goes, I don't have 7:30. And she's like, because like, hey, he's sitting right over there. And I'm like, hey, nice to meet you, sir, da da da, who I was. And she's like, the guy who proposed to me. And he's like, oh, okay. So he we talk, and he goes, give me 5 minutes to get settled in, and you'll come back. So I went back there talking to him and just explaining like my desire and what I want, and give me a chance. All I want is a chance, right? And if I don't pass it, you'll never hear from me again, and that's it, And he's like, they walked out of there. He goes, I don't know what it is. He said, I'm taking a chance, but he said, I'll give you a shot. He goes, you have a shot. So he gives me, this place where I need to go to and get all my training materials and my books and study material and all that stuff. And he's like, yeah, just lock in. And so I literally went back home for 90 days. And I was like just nonstop the entire, like day, night, until I would fall asleep, and I would just study. And I did that for 90 days, went in to take the exam. And right before you hit the button of like, okay, are you ready? Like, is this your final answer type thing? You're just sweating because you're just, I don't know if all this is going to pay off, Same story, right? When you're buying, like when I went to start the restaurant, I didn't know what was going to turn out. I didn't know if it was going to be successful. I had no idea, but you got to be all in. You got to dive in and do it. So I hit the button. I'm sitting there, and it's like, you see the little dots, going across the screen, and it seems like it's forever, but it's probably seconds, but it seemed like it was minutes. And all of a sudden I get the thing that comes across the screen, and it says pass. And I'm just freaking out because in the background, I'm hearing these people. I had this prep study class 2 weeks prior to that where they would teach you just taking strategies. And all of these guys were like, that were really, these third generation stockbroker, a finance guy who had his MBA in finance, and I'm hearing them because they were taking the test at the same time, and they're like, swearing and like huffing and puffing, and that's BS, and da da. And some guys were crying because they didn't pass it, and I'm like, I'm freaking out to hit that button to know if I did, and then boom, it pops up that I passed, and it was like, yeah, like something that I didn't know that I could do, that I didn't have the background for, I didn't have the education, I didn't have anything else, but I had the drive and determination and grit to just buckle in and do what I had to do. And yeah, passing that. And then I became a stockbroker and, learned that business from the inside out and kind of how all that works. And from there, I got a job offer at the World Trade Center in New York, where the Twin Towers were. And I was going to work in the crude oil pit. Okay, where it's where they trade futures, right? They trade, crude oil futures. And I got there and I was in heaven being there on the trading floor, because back then it's just full-blown trading floor, the signals, paper everywhere, just everybody's going crazy in the pit. And yeah, I just was like, wow, this is where I should be. But at the same time, it was like, I grew up in a town of 500 people, right? And I just couldn't see myself living in New York City. I just couldn't see myself living in New York City. So I called the guy politely and I was like, look, I really appreciate this opportunity, because I was supposed to go the next day to meet the owners of the firm. And I said, but I just can't see myself working in New York City. He's like, okay. He said, well, yeah, I appreciate you calling and being upfront about it. He goes, I get it. It's not for everybody, But that day that I was supposed to go back for that second interview was when the World Trade Center, when the bomb blew up in the bottom of the World Trade Center, in that parking garage that I was supposed to go. And that's where I was supposed to park that day. And I didn't go. I probably wouldn't be here today if I took that second interview there. So that was surreal, right? And so I basically decided to move to Chicago and work, because I'm like, well, if the next best place from New York is going to be Chicago. So I went to Chicago and started working with a gentleman who he had a company that worked in the actual commodities. So like he would like after there was a hurricane, some natural disaster, whatever, his company would go in and do the assessments for the insurance company. So they would be like, oh, we've got a grain of oats, or we've got a silo of oats, or we've got this, that, or the other. So he dealt in the actual commodities. So he wanted to work in the futures market to kind of speculate or hedge some of his real world from his company operations. Started working with him, and we started, at the time, again, no internet, right? No, not the technology, world that we have today. And we would plug into this, it was, I think it was a T1 or T3 line, and we would connect into that. And then we would have access to the trades there. And did that, and just really was like, kind of fast forward a little bit and to get to kind of present day, to just kind of speed this up a little bit. We took all of those things that I learned in the market trading, and we condensed those down into a beta version. We got a programmer, a developer, and kind of put all what was in my head into program knowledge that would produce signals for us, instead of actually doing it from experience, but doing it through the signals. So we produced that, and now we have a full system that produces the buy and sell signals for us, and we're launching a hedge fund. It's called Panther Funds. It's without the vowels, so it's PNTHR funds.com, pantherfunds.com. And what that is it's really a hedge fund, a long short equity hedge fund, where we can buy stocks, sell stocks, short stocks. We have that flexibility within the documentation of the fund. Yeah, so we're getting that launched, and that should be launched here within the next 2 weeks. So that's been a year-long journey of everything that it takes to get a fund up and running. So anyways, that's probably more information that you were looking for, but a little of little of the background and some of the things that have, really shaped my, I guess, my philosophy.
So what's you were doing the futures, you were in the futures market before. What's the when we talk about futures market, what's the difference between that market and the other asset classes?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a ton of asset classes, right? But we'll just talk futures and stocks for a minute. So futures is there's several different types of futures, right? So you have like your meats, like your live hogs and your pork bellies, and right, and then you have your financial instruments, right? Your T bonds, your T bills, blah 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 blah. You have your grains like your oats, your wheat, corn, right? You have all of these different categories within the futures market. And you, with a futures contract, they're contracts instead of shares, right? In the stock market. So you buy a contract or you sell a contract, depending on what you expect, but you have to choose the month that contract is being traded. So let's say that you were trading soybeans and you were going to trade November beans, right? So you could, if let's say let's say it's today, right? And you want to buy a November contract of soybeans. So let's say that you have a farm, you're a farmer, and you want to, kind of lock in the soybeans, right? You want to lock in the price for soybeans. Or maybe you use soybeans in your end product, right? So you have to buy a lot of soybeans for a manufacturing type product. You might say, look, I'm going to lock in the price so I don't have surprises. So if soybeans skyrockets by the time I'm ready to buy the contract, I've kind of locked in my price. And so that's how a lot of people, will use it who are in the producing end or manufacturing, depending on what type of because there's like lumber, right, where people are trying to lock in their lumber price. So, and then you have the people that are speculators, like we were, where you say, hey, we're looking at different things, technical analysis, what have you, fundamental analysis, and we're saying we believe that, lumber is going to go higher. So we would buy a contract of lumber, and then we would sell that contract prior to the delivery date, right? Because we don't want to, have lumber set up, delivered in our driveway, or we don't want to have a bunch of pork bellies, sitting outside in our driveway. So you have to be very, very diligent. You got to make sure that you sell that contract prior to, that contract expiring. So, or the delivery date of that. So yeah, the futures market is really just designed for speculation. If you like to, if you're just kind of saying, hey, I just want to make some money, you can do that with a lot of leverage. Or there's also ways to do that in the stock market, right? And you compare that to the stock market where you're buying a share of stock of a company. And sometimes you're buying it short term. You have people that are scalpers, or they just kind of take very quick movements of price. You have people that are day traders. You have people that are more position traders. People are swing traders, et cetera. And so everybody has their different way of doing that. But Richard, the hardest thing to figure out is you have to match your personality with it. And what I mean by that is when you there's another story here that I could share with you. So there's a gentleman, he passed away. His name was Van K. Tharp. And one of the first books I read on the market was a book by Jack Schwager called Market Wizards. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or if you read that book. It's an awesome book. I would start with the very first one, Market Wizards, and it's interviews with top traders, right? And these people are ones that started with, a few $100 and are now, worth hundreds of millions of dollars trading, but no one knows who they are. It does, like back then, no one knew who they were. They weren't public figures. They weren't anything else. They just they're below the radar, right? And these people would just tell their stories in an interview process of just like you're doing today, right? Like, how did you get started? How did this come to be? What do you think, when a market does this or that or the other? And I read that book in I think one sitting. Like it was just like, oh, I couldn't get it. I was like so fascinated that that was a possibility. And so the last person interviewed in that book was a guy by the name of Van K. Tharp. And he was an investment psychologist. I'm like, wait, what's that? Like he worked with these top traders when they would get into a slump, right? So they might be like really good traders and then they get into a slump, just like in sports or baseball or whatever, right? They're like, I can't hit the ball for anything, and I don't know why. I'm like a incredible, my batting average, my on base percentage, everything's awesome, but for whatever reason, I'm in a slump. And traders get in that same thing, and it's based on what's going on in here. And so he works with them to figure out what that is or what's blocking them so that they can get back to who they are, right? To be the Michael Jordan of what they do. And so I read that, and back then, again, you're just looking it up and you could call information and find out someone's phone number. And I called him and I called his office because, again, no internet. You can't just like, oh, look someone up or whatever. There's no internet, So I call him and I said, hey, listen, he was living in, I think it's Cary, North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. And I was in Georgia. This is when I had my franchise. And I called him. I said, hey, listen, I read about you. I would love to come meet you and kind of pick your brain. Can I come up this weekend? And he's like, where are you? And I'm like, I'm in Georgia. I'm like, I'll drive up this weekend. He goes, you're going to drive from Georgia to North Carolina to come see me? I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay. So, show up, knock on his door, and went in there and had an office like in the basement of his house and just sat there, and I just picked his brain of, all of this stuff and how it works with traders and what makes them say, what makes them do what they do. And one of the biggest lessons in there was that you have got to find, everybody goes into the market because they want to make money, right? Yeah, I want to make money. But in reality, that might not be the case. So I'm like, well, what do you mean if they don't want to make money? I don't get it. Like, what are they doing this for? And he said they might be doing it for some other reason. Maybe they want respect. Maybe they want the opportunity to be right. Maybe they want something other than the making of the money. And what also happens is it works in the opposite. So like you'll have these different values that you honor in your life, right? So maybe you value honesty, you value love, you value whatever it might be. And you have all these different values here. And let's see where money comes into that. And maybe you value love over money. Okay, maybe in your hierarchy, if I said, hey, Richard, would you rather have money or respect? And you're like, I don't know what your answer would be, but let's just say I'll respect. I'm like, perfect. And I say, would you rather have respect or love? And you're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe maybe respect or whatever. And then you go through this thing and you go through hundreds of these value, analysis, and you go through, and it ends up ranking them in what you feel is most important to you. But what you end up seeing visually is where these conflicts are going to come into play. So, Richard, let's say that you have let's say you value love over money. Okay. Well, just to pick one. And now it comes time, okay, it's time to study my charts, or it's time to look at my investments and dive in what I'm going to do tomorrow. And then the wife knocks on the door, is like, honey, come on, won't you spend time with me? Like, we want to watch this show. We're going to do whatever. Right. And you're like, because you value love over money. So now what do? You go and do that. And now the next day's trading comes, and what happens? You weren't prepared for the day, right? So there's all these conflicts that can come into play that you don't even realize are conflicts that are happening. And so anyway, so when I talk about, whether it's futures or crypto or stocks or whatever real estate, whatever asset class that you want to be a part of, you also have to make sure that it aligns with your personality and also what you really want out of it. Because there's a saying that says you will always get out of the markets what you want. And so, but sometimes what you want is you want love, you want respect, you want whatever, you want to be right, you want whatever those things happen to be. And so if any of those are in conflict with making money, you'll end up losing the money instead of making it. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. All right. We're gonna have to do a part two of this. I don't know if that's okay with you. We'll speak after because time is running on my side. I forgot to tell you like the time limit
Oh yeah, no worry.
for the show, but it's okay. We'll continue. On that note, everybody, thanks for watching the podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. Goodbye.